Joining me on Market Catalyst today is Bob Roberts, who's been a longtime player and developer and refurbisher in the St. Pete real estate space. Good to see you, Bob.
Nice to see you. Thanks for having me.
So I thought we'd do a little tour through history and get some of the stories behind some of the iconic buildings in St. Pete. You've been involved with working on a bunch of them. So let's kick off with the Snell Arcade.
Okay. Well, I started off as a leasing agent. That's where I got my background. Worked for a major developer out of Philadelphia, handled about 17 malls and shopping centers around the state, and went off my own after about 2 years. Worked for a broker in St. Pete Beach for a year, built about 6 strip centers for them. At the end of that year, I decided I wanted to go off my own, and I wanted to do something with downtown. Downtown was just a mess. So I looked around. I looked at the Snell Arcade building. It was called the Rutland Building at the time. It was owned by banker Rutland Bank and Hubert Rutland. And he owned a lot of property downtown. And I walked into his office and I said, "Mr. Rutland, I want to buy your building and I want to renovate it." And he said, "Okay." I said, "How much do you want for it?" He goes, $2 million. And I said, "I'll pay you $500,000. And he said, $1 million. I said, "Sold." I said, "But here's how we're going to do it. I'm going to give you $10,000 a month for 9 months, then I'm going to close." He said, "Now, let me get this right. You're going to give me $10,000 a month, and if you miss a payment or are late, it's over. I keep all the money." I said, "Yes, sir." He got on the phone, called his attorneys, and said, "Go ahead and work with Mr. Roberts to get a contract drawn up." And so I was feverishly out there trying to find tenants to pre-lease the building before we, had to do construction. And there was a write-up in the St. Petersburg Times, so it wasn't really my doing. But a guy named John Gilbreth, who lived in Bayfront Towers at the time and was the president of Security Fund Management, Inc., worked with Templeton World Fund. He called me up and said he wanted to talk. Showed him around the building. We're coming down the elevator. He says, "Bob," he said, "I think this is a good idea, but why don't you just sell it to me?" And I said, "No." And he made me an offer. By the time we got to the bottom, he bought the building. So the only other agreement we had is I was going to handle the restoration and development and get it put on the National Register of Historic Places and that kind of stuff. So,
well, let me jump in there. So, number one, you have a very efficient negotiating style, right? It sounds like. Why that building, and what's the vision you had to renovate it? Why'd you pick Snell, or at that point Rutland?
Well, I had friends. I had an artist friend actually that was interested, in the building, like the design, that type of thing, and so that was one of the reasons. But I just thought it was the most beautiful building in downtown St. Petersburg. And it was on the corner of 4th and Central. Back then, downtown was kind of small. But basically went from 5th Street, 5th Avenue to 5th Avenue to the Bay. So that's the reason we did it.
And how ambitious of a project was this? So did you had Galbraith not come along, would you have been in trouble, or were you feeling pretty good about it?
Who knows? I mean, I felt pretty good about it, but I was always very optimistic. So
I hear you. All right. So you passed it. So then I guess because of that, then you probably just assigned it straight from Rutland to him. You never actually had to take ownership of it, saved all those transaction costs and whatnot.
Correct.
And then let's talk about the renovation. How did that roll?
Well, I suggested an architect, Charlie Canterday, and brought Charlie in to meet with Mr. Gilbreth. And we went through a couple of contractors in the very beginning, but Charlie did a fantastic job. We hired someone from the University of South Florida to get it on the National Register. He did that, and I just basically oversaw the renovation. Charlie did most of the work. He was the professional. I had never done any restoration work before. I did construction, had a construction company, but it with John Groves behind it. He looked at it. He told me, he says, "I'm not buying this building as an investment. To me, it's a typewriter." Remember, we're talking 1980, so typewriters were still used. But so he just needed the whole building for his staff and his equipment.
Got it. And at this point, there weren't a lot of major facelifts happening in St. Pete, right? This is sort of there hadn't been any in a while before you did this.
Probably in 20 or 30 years.
Yeah. So then coming out of that project, did that spawn some attention, some energy, and what came next?
That building got a lot of attention from other developers or real estate people within the market. So when we closed on that building, I sold it to John Gilbert 3 months later. At that same time, I contracted to buy another building from Mr. Rutland, closed simultaneously, which is we called it the Detroit 200 building. It was on the corner of 2nd Street and 1st Avenue. And we used a development block grant. And the grant was for the whole block. And so I went and coordinated with all the owners to get them to sign on and renovate their buildings. So that moved right into that project.
And that ended up as Janus. Yeah. So what was what was the original vision as you went to those owners in that block as to what you wanted that inside to be? Was it always a venue, or was it just a restoration project and the venue came later?
It was just a restoration project. I owned half the courtyard, and a gentleman named Bob Barnes and Bill Pendergrass, who owned the Detroit Hotel, owned the other half of the courtyard. My envision was to have retail going down that alley, and then I wasn't sure what we're going to do with the courtyard. But Bob and Bill started putting together concerts, and I ended up selling them my half of that courtyard so they could control that entire venue.
So, and that was pretty early on after the restoration was completed?
Yes, within a year, maybe 2 years.
All right. So you're beautifying a building. You're launching a use space that ended up being Janus Landing. What's next?
Well, first of all, the reason we could do all this is because the tax credit situation was different. Back then, if you bought and renovated a building, you could either depreciate the entire restoration cost over 5 years, or you could take a 10% investment tax credit. And every one of these projects, with the exception of the Snell Arcade, I put together using a limited partnership type venue. So we actually raised money in the community at $30,000 a pop times 30 people, and each one of those projects was developed that way.
So early crowdsourcing.
Right. And then I contracted to buy the Crest building from the Crest company. I partnered with Ian Irwin, which was the president of Southeast Capital. He was a great friend, and he died much too young, but phenomenal real estate developer, phenomenal mind. And we ended up leasing that entire building to the city of St. Petersburg. Then next one down, I think, was the Alexander Hotel. I was actually contacted by a bank somewhere in South Florida. They wanted me to handle the restoration. So I never actually bought that building. I mean, I was the managing general partner of it, and we used industrial revenue bonds. And that bank bought all the bonds. But it was a fun renovation. We gutted the entire thing and started from scratch.
And how long did your ownership tenure last with Crest? Where did that end up? How did you?
My ex-wife owned it until they sold it. So yes.
Okay. So it sounds like in there, a lot of creativity, both in the partnering end, the financing end. You're talking about bonds. You're talking about sort of a variation on crowdsource investment. With the lens that there hadn't been much going on in the 20, 30 years before. Now you're hitting building after building and sort of working your way around downtown St. Pete. Do you remember the kinds of conversations you were having with community leaders and business folks as far as, hey, this could really be the genesis of an overall upgrade to the downtown area?
Oh, absolutely. We had a city manager form of government back then. Alan Harvey was the city manager. We got in a fight. The block right across the street, across Central Avenue from Janus Landing, where the Industrious building is, 200 Central Avenue. There was 5 owners of the north half of that block. And I contracted with all those 5. It took me about 6 months, and we agreed to purchase the property. and I wanted to build the first high-rise in downtown St. Petersburg at that point. And as soon as I contracted it and someone leaked it to the newspaper, I got a phone call from Alan saying, hey, Bob, that belongs to Florida Progress, Florida Power. I said, really? I didn't understand that. I have the contract. And the city owned the other half across the alley. And so he was quite upset, filed condemnation proceedings against me. We got into a lawsuit. He dropped the lawsuit. He went up to, put out requests for proposals. There's only 2 people bidding. That was me and Florida Power. The Alexander Hotel was coming up to closing at that time, and we had to have the industrial revenue bonds approved by the city council. And at that meeting, the city council was informed that I had sued the city because of the condemnation proceedings that the city brought against me. And the city council decided they were going to not vote on my industrial revenue bond approval, which had to be done that day or I would have lost the whole thing, unless I solved the situation with Florida Power. So they set up a meeting in Alan Harvey's office. Guys from Florida Power came in and offered me $250,000 more than I paid for it. And I took it because I needed to close the Alexander, which would have cost me 400 and some odd thousand. So it was rough. Yeah. And, Alan Harvey eventually, not shortly after that, maybe a year after that, got fired. And I was blamed for turning him in. So at that point, things were kind of rough around the city. So we had a lot of conversations, a lot of hope, but there was a lot of stuff going on.
Sure. And of course, the building you refer to is kind of over your left shoulder right now. I don't know. So, where does that leave you then? You're out of that deal. You've got the bonds now sorted. At this point, did you take a break from developing in St. Pete, or?
I finished up the construction of the Alexander Hotel, bought and sold a couple of pieces of property downtown, and moved out to Terra Verde, started looking at doing other developments, and actually got a phone call from one of my bankers. I had like 17 different bank accounts in different banks around the area of different projects. And I got a call from one of my bankers saying that they weren't going to renew my loans. Commercial loans renew every 3 years. So when they say that, it's kind of distressing. But it was political. I got blackballed from the yacht club, and I had to sell everything. I sold everything within 6 months, which turned out to be a good thing. All my investors did very well. They got an average return of about 22% on their investment. And then the market crashed, and a lot of people that bought my property had problems. So,
And what year would that have been?
86, I believe.
Okay. So, as much as you can put aside the sort of the swamp you had to wander through with regard to the politics and whatnot, if you just put your developer's hat on, and that you had a hand in, or led the charge in redeveloping a lot of these properties. Fast forward to our current city, how do you feel we've done continuing that work?
Well, it's fantastic. I mean, I've been away for 20 years, but I've been coming back to St. Petersburg at least 3 or 4 times a year for 4 or 5 days. I have children, grandchildren here. And I moved to Alabama. I did some development work in Alabama, not much. But every time I came down here, the first place I would go for dinner or lunch or to meet people and meet with friends would be downtown St. Petersburg. It was just amazing. I couldn't believe what was going on, how fast it was going. So, I couldn't be more happy with what's happening. I do have concerns going forward, but, gentrification is going to be an issue. And
have you seen any good counter strategies to gentrification that you think we should try here?
Well, I think that there's room for investment groups that would focus on funding for local businesses, let's say on 22nd Street, 16th Street, around the Tropicana area, that would give current tenants, current residents, the chance to own their property, to buy their property. That would be something that would help, where they could get benefit from the increased value that's going to happen downtown. So, and that is going to be downtown. The downtown is growing, so things of that nature.
Well, thanks for the character of our city is certainly doing no small part to those buildings. They really are iconic, and thanks for your work in making them as such. And appreciate you stopping by to share a few stories from back in the day.
I enjoyed it. Thank you.
Bob Roberts, thanks.